And here we go. So on the handout, I did have show and tell resources first, but I want to enter into the resources by way of gratitude. So the question that she posed and poses for us to consider is, what makes you grateful? And I think that's a way in which we will introduce ourselves today. And you in Zoomlandia, I think I will go to you first and answering the question and succinctly, what makes you grateful? Yeah, I'm putting Kitty, John, and Gloria on the spot.
Kitty Cosachata from Arizona. Most grateful that God placed such a Christian family out there to adopt me and that I grow in the Christian faith.
Thank you. John or Gloria?
Okay, I'll go. I thought I saw Gloria reaching for the mute button. John Seaman, and the thing that makes me grateful is for having a supporting community around me. You know, hope and various elements of hope and, you know, work and, you know, just having a great sense of community, supporting and loving community.
Good. Thank you, John. Gloria?
Yes. I'm very thankful for having been born to my family. We're wonderful people and a great community of family friends. And also for having found Hope, because Hope Church, because here I have a community. And I feel very, very thankful and comfortable there.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Grounds, what makes you grateful?
I'm Greg Grounds. Lots of things make me grateful, but one that comes flooding to mind is the fact that my adult children are happily married and employed and on their own and bringing new lives into this world. And they all decided to move back to Austin, and we have a great relationship with them.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Natalie?
Natalie Day, and several have said I'm grateful for so many things, certainly family, and just feel very richly blessed. I feel like I've lived in a bubble, like I have been incredibly fortunate in so many ways that I don't deserve, and so I'm very grateful for health and family and my church. And at this particular moment, I'm really grateful for the choir.
Mm-hmm.
That's really a nice experience.
Mercy Ngoma. There are a lot of things that I'm grateful for. First of all, it's my family. I feel loved and appreciated. And the work I do, I feel God has a purpose for me. And I'm grateful that God is with me and has put me in a place where I know He takes care of.
Thank you.
Wendy Grounds, feel like a broken record, but you know, I'm grateful for for all the families. I'm grateful for our family. I'm grateful for this family, church choir family as a subset, as well as my work family. Yeah, good supportive groups. You know.
I'm John Hoffner, and I'm grateful, of course, for many things, but to feel loved and to have a great opportunity for this day, and also loved by family, friends, work, and our church.
Emily Hobby, there's so many things to be grateful for. I'm grateful for God's grace in my life, and what He's done through that grace, and for my
So Diane, the question is, what makes you grateful?
okay.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wow.
Wow.
What a cut. Well, she's not grateful for her pastor. Wow, I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's okay. I mean, I'm so easy to overlook because I'm so
No.
quiet and interview.
Oh, yeah. What a wallflower.
Like everyone, I have a lot to be grateful for. I'm especially grateful for my children and grandchildren and my friends and my puppy dog that makes me smile every day. And I'm grateful for this church, finding this church and becoming a part of its family has done a lot to restore my faith and my love and humanity. That's
I'm glad we didn't miss that. Thank you. I'm glad we didn't miss that.
I'm
Thank you.
Diane Rogers, and I am grateful for family and friends and my Hope Church family and the Bible studies and the Christian education we have here. Phenomenal. Not only do we learn about God's word, but we become close to all the people involved.
Thank you.
Those relationships.
Thank you.
I am Diana Petrick, and I'm grateful for my community, my family community. And I'm also grateful to have a God who picks me up when I fall.
Thank you. Pastor Josh, and I'm grateful for my vocation, and I thoroughly enjoyed living out a part of my vocation at this church. But the calling to ministry itself is something that fills my bucket and gives me great joy. And the fact that I get to do it with folks like y'all is cherry on top. And I'm very grateful for my vocation. In it, she was talking about in her chapter this week on expressing gratitude. She acknowledges that gratitude may seem like an odd way to overcome anxiety about talking about racism. Acknowledging that the discussion of racism does indeed generate anxiety. Call a spade, that's truth. And part of what we have been trying to do is to work on reducing some of that anxiety so that we can enter into relationships and conversations from a position of humility and strength and with a desire to grow and listen. And she talks about expressing gratitude. Now, when I read this chapter a year and a half ago, I thought it very bizarre. And it's taken me some time to figure out, well, what does it mean to express gratitude or to use gratitude as a tool for engagement on difficult conversations? And one of the things that we do here at the church is called the preferred path. And it is a conflict mediation process. Diana is our conflict preferred path mediator. And so when there are conflicts, John and I get sideways with each other. And we engage in a process that Diana mediates or facilitates so that we're able to hear and validate and listen to one another. And if the process works well, that at the end of the day, we have entered into something that she elevates in her chapter, which is recognition, right? Being able to recognize John for what he is bringing to the conversation, and John also recognizing what I bring to the conversation, rather than getting mired into our defensiveness and into our bunkers and only just lobbing grenades at each other. It's a chance for us to be at the table and to have a chance of, as she talks about, mutual recognition and exchange, an opportunity to share gifts and to express gratitude. She writes, if I feel I will be receiving a gift through this challenging discussion, and if I anticipate being able to offer gifts, I may participate. I am much more confident and willing to keep talking, even amidst the challenging feelings that may come from difficult conversations. So John and I get to a point where the idea would be that we're both coming to the table willing to share, but also expecting to have received something. That I understand that John is going to share something about himself, which I am going to receive as a gift. Does that make sense? This isn't something that is, I don't know that we all do that. Sometimes when we go into lock horns with each other, it is, well, I'm gonna give, I'm gonna give, and it's not a great gift sometimes, but wouldn't it be a fascinating approach in conflict or in tough conversations if we were approaching the table with a sense of curiosity, with a sense of wonder, with a sense of anticipation for the gift that John is going to share with me, what the other is going to share with me. I can then position myself to work on setting aside some defensiveness and just simply receiving what someone else has to offer and to appreciate that. Does that make sense? Has anyone ever thought about that before? About this idea of using gratitude as a way of growth? Or if you read the chapter, when she was talking about this, what was some of the thoughts with regard to this mutual exchange of gratitude as a means for growth?
Well, I think if you recognize that, as you're saying, even though you have your point of view, right? You have what you believe is right, or you wouldn't believe it. And now you're confronted with someone who is in the same position at a different point on the spectrum. So, yeah, rather than beating each other up, if you can say, okay, you have something you believe, I'd like to understand that and understand why. And so then I learned something from that. So that is a gift from them. And I think you're right. If you approach it that way, then maybe you find some common ground, maybe you don't, but at least you're learning something about the other person, learning something that maybe might enlighten you, or if nothing else, it will enlighten you a little bit into where they're coming from so that you can communicate.
Yeah.
It opens it up instead of shutting it down.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're being open enough to hear it.
Right.
That's kind of sense. They have to both be willing participants. Sometimes, they go into this, but it doesn't end up being that way. It ends up with one person gets, you don't mean to offend someone, but somehow you've offended them, and that's where all this comes from. And then it's not gratitude anymore. So I think it's a real great philosophy, but I think it can be difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the next point, right? That's it isn't just a Hallmark card kind of gratitude she's talking about. She says gratitude isn't a gimmick, but it is serious business. The idea, it is not just simply on Thanksgiving Day, us sitting around the table and say, well, what are you grateful for this year? And I know mostly what my family is going to say around the table. The family and the dog, and I get that.
In that order?
No, it's usually the dogs first.
Well, Phoenix and Wendy will put the dog first.
My family always starts with food, just saying.
Well, yeah, they start with the food. They'll give and thanks for the food.
Yes,
Yeah, got it. Yeah. So, but I would challenge us this Thanksgiving in thinking about if we were to be real serious about gratitude. I think this is probably, many of you know, that we have a community ecumenical worship service the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And I'm preaching at that this year. And I think this will be some of the groundwork that I'm going to talk about. How do we get really serious about that for which we're grateful and that for which we have received from another? Now, some of what makes it difficult, Cricket, is that we don't all live with a sense of wonder. So, you know, I try to live with a sense of wonder and say, if I'm feeling this way, I'm curious as to where it's coming from. Why is this affecting me in the way that it is? And I want to do the hard work to do that. But I also know too, John and I get to the table and I may have that, but he might not. And he might not be as interested in understanding where does that come from Pastor Josh? Whereas I might be interested. Excuse me. And that can make it difficult for sure, as far as for the engagement process. And that's why I think it's a discipline, and why she underscores this isn't easy. This isn't a gimmick. She writes, if your gifts of gratitude are viewed with suspicion, stay present and engaged. So John and I are at the table, we're having a meaty conversation. The tendency is to retreat and hide behind the bunker, right? And my hope for us would be listen beyond the words, right? You know, and stay engaged and stay active, because at some point there's going to be something which is the meat, the jewel of the gift for which I want to receive. She continues, and Emily, I see I'm going to come right back to you after this. Accept that others may have a reason for not trusting you right away. Be available and ready to offer your gifts at the best time when others recognize the need. Gratitude is what motivates you. It is not something that you can expect in return. So this is the posture that I want to hold. If you remember a few weeks ago, I talked about after George Floyd, and there was the big march downtown, and I had a friend that I took, and he was struggling and wrestling, like, what should I do? We're a bunch of white guys down here. And I said, well, I don't have the answers, but I always want to put myself in a place to listen and assume a posture of intake and being grateful for whatever gets shared with me this day, even if it may be difficult for me to hear. So, Emily, please.
And that leads to what I was thinking. She demonstrated in her discussion with that graduate student about the thesis, and she said, so I hear you saying, and I think that's the problem. Sometimes we react in conversations and discussions, and we all need to have some active listening skills where we say, I hear you saying, and acknowledge where that person is, and we need to be acknowledged where we are to understand, and this idea of not presenting guilt. This is the fact of history, and you and I weren't born then, and we had no control, but we can control the now, and I can hear how your ancestors have been hurt, and how this hurt continues, and I didn't have the facts about that injustice, and will you hear that I didn't have those facts? Let's work together now. I think we need to work on our active witness, because I think you brought that out. That's what Diana does when she acts as a mediator too. And maybe we first need to learn how to listen actively, and then we can move to discussion.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I was actually thinking about the graduate student as well, because that one, I've read that now a couple of times, and that one of all the stories she's told is one that's been challenging for me, and you can see his real struggle as he's trying to express that through his experience, and I would say that one was one that challenged me as well. But you saw with her, she had to tap in a little bit more to listening, because she admits, I was already thinking about having to read this book or read that theologian, and she needed to slow down and begin to appreciate the gift that he was offering of his experience.
Even in her discussion of doing the interview, and she had that image of what
Right.
that woman was, and then the woman was a visual history lesson, and to understand, slow yourself down and understand where someone is coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what is at root with our people, our society, where and maybe it's a first world American Western civilization at Texas attitude of, I got to be right and you got to be wrong. Maybe, I don't know. But I think with a cultural norm of having to be right and having to win, I have to win, makes it very difficult to engage in that process. I remember in seminary, I learned a lot of things in seminary, but one of the things that helped with developing a sense of humility was sometimes the vote doesn't go your way, and being able to live joyfully with that. One of the things I teach in officer training as elders come on to session is that sometimes the vote goes your way and sometimes it doesn't. And either way, we all own the vote together. And that is the movement of the Spirit. And sometimes I think the idea with regard to humility of slowing down and trying to lower or temper some of those things that, or at least just recognizing, oh, I recognize my bunker's coming up, my walls are starting to come up. Just recognizing some of that may be enough to slow the draw gate, before coming all the way up. Does that make sense? And I think that takes discipline. I think that takes practice, and I have found, I don't know if this is the same for everybody, I have found for myself, the way in which I best do that is by reading, right? What are the easiest conversations that I can have, right? It's picking up a book. And in picking up a book, I am putting myself in a position to listen to what uninterrupted, what the author is saying, right? It's an intake of the information. Then I get to dialogue in my head and I can receive what is being offered from that and internalize that and begin to dialogue and chew on it and to have a better understanding of perspective. The skills of investigating and dialoguing with authors is something then I can convert outward and listening with John, right? Because sometimes the practice of discipline of that active listening skills only comes through failing in conversation with others or try again. Does that make sense? Anybody from Zoomlandia want to say anything?
I did, Josh. I think you listed off a couple of things that it helps to have when you're in that process of some time. I always have a saying. You said sometimes the boat drifts your way, sometimes it drifts the other way. I always say sometimes you're the bug, sometimes you're the windshield. So but you had talked about the officer training on session, and sometimes the vote's going to go your way, sometimes it isn't. But I would add faith to one of those things that helps you get through. Sometimes when decisions don't go your way, because as on the other thing you tell us in officer training there is that you're not voting the way you want something to go. You're not voting the way you think the congregation wants something to go. You're voting as the Holy Spirit is motivating you to vote or leading you to vote. And so, it's easier, I think, to accept a vote that might go the other way, or if you're one of the dissenting folks, because you realize that, hey, maybe, maybe I'm being led to have this belief, but everybody else is being led by that same Holy Spirit, and it went the other way. So maybe there's a reason that, I was supposed to say something in session and, something like that. But I think that applies also outside of session in real life. I reminded that prayer about, Lord, give me the strength to change the things I can, the humility or the discipline to accept the things I can't, right? And then the humility to know which is which, right? So, I think about that a lot sometimes.
Yeah.
Because in my life, my background, it is usually not a consensus-based decision-making process, so.
Yeah,
It's a little bit different.
you do, and I order, you follow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the person above you, there's always somebody above you, so.
Yeah, no, I think the idea of sometimes you're the windshield wiper and sometimes you're the bug. I often think of, I say the little red truck and the squirrel, but sometimes you're the red truck, sometimes you're the squirrel. Same thing, but too much more graphic. Natalie.
I've actually lived that.
I'm thinking about this in the context of what I do. Part of what I do is test other people's work in my job. So this is a totally different, it's not the same level of emotional, but still I'm testing and finding, sometimes I find something wrong with what somebody else did. And so over the years of doing that, finding a way to, number one, present that in a way that the person who's being told, oh, this isn't working right, can accept. And then also, especially if I don't know that person, having them come back and say, well, yes, it does. And not having to be, no, yes, it does, no, it doesn't, but being having the humility, which has been a long time learning, to go back and say, okay, let me show you what I see. And maybe I'm not seeing something, or maybe I'm going about it wrong or whatever, but let's go through it together. And doing that in a humble way to say, here's what I'm seeing. What did I do wrong? What did I misunderstand? And sometimes they say, oh, no, instead you're supposed to do it this way. Oh, okay. And when it's really working in production, that's how, okay, well then it's fine. But also being willing to stick to my guns and say, well, here's, and so having that, thinking of that as gratitude is a real different way of approaching it, but that's helpful. And so I think about that and then in this much more emotional context and much less cut and dry, I can say, well, here's, let me show you, and I need to be the one who stops and says, I don't understand. I can't imagine, what you're talking about. And just being quiet and listening. And like you said, reading, listening to, things where I'm just receiving and not, and trying to just be open to what am I missing? What did I misunderstand? What is it about your experience that causes you to be angry or defensive or to shut down or to stop trying, whatever it is, stop trying that I'm not getting because I can't imagine your experience. It's foreign to me, but you can help me to understand at least at some level. And that's just, that's very helpful to think of that process of give and take as a process of.
Thank you. I will say, I've been knowing you for many years. Now I know why you operate that way. That's great. I didn't know that came out of your vocational life. You've used those words on me before. Thank you, Cricket.
Well, I was just going to respond to what you said about the give and take. The big thing there is both parties have to be willing to give and take. And you say you're going to give and take, but sometimes something happens in that conversation and that, you know.
It doesn't always, especially if it's someone that I haven't worked with. It may not happen right away. And, you know, sometimes I've worked with people who said, nope, you're wrong, I'm right, I'm not gonna try to fix it because it's not broken. Okay, it's not broken.
That's what I'm.
And they walk away, and that's where that persistence comes in to say, okay, how can I approach this differently? How can I go away? Because I don't have any control over that person's response. The only thing I can control is what I do. And I have found over the years, again, this is not an easy thing. It's been a lot of years learning this. The more I can go, okay, let's figure out some other way to get this across. I can't expect someone else to be grateful for me finding something wrong with what they do. That's a lot to ask. And it really is a lot to ask.
Well, sometimes it takes some time to process too. So
It does.
I've been on the other side of your equation. I'm a software developer, and my QA, we call them, would bring me a problem, and I'd look at it. It's like, nope, I see what you're saying, but nope, it's not related to this or what. And this one lady, Mary, would sometimes she would be in tears, and it's like, sorry, Mary, no, and then I'd go away, not trying to hurt her feelings, and then driving home on 183 in the traffic, I go, that could happen. So then I'd get on the phone and call Mary and apologize profusely, and we'd make up the next day. But it's like, sometimes it's like, I was absolutely sure there's no way, but then finally the right neuron fires, you go, oh yeah. So maybe it's just some processing time.
Yeah.
Well, and the gratitude is, hey, my QA found it instead of my customer.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
and that's how both sides become part of this working together to figure out the right solution.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to find it.
Emily?
I like how you brought out, we have to adopt humility. I think that is a hard thing to do. There was a great story on, I can't remember which news program I heard it on. And it referred to the Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson. And that's the one that established separate but equal is good and turned our nation in one particular direction. There is an organization formed by the descendants of Plessy and Ferguson, and it's not Plessy versus Ferguson, it's now Plessy and Ferguson to try to educate the history that is taking place and everything. It was such an encouraging step. It may seem like baby steps, but we need this. These are the baby steps that we have to take as our country, I think, right now.
Well, I like the idea of just changing the conjunction.
Yes.
And from a versus to an and. And the other thing I would add and is that when we're entering into these dialogues, right? It's never a one-time thing. It's not meant to be a one and done. It is John and I, we had a go at it, or we had a session and maybe we didn't hit it. So we have another session, right? Because in time, not that we're wearing each other down, but in time and cricket, it reminded me of something I shared in that first class, which is sometimes we can get so polarized in our position or so defensive in our position, we're not able to move beyond to a point of listening or accepting. And sometimes it's that pathway. And if I know that if I were to engage in a conversation on race that would cause my defenses to go up, if I just know that without actually having to do it, then I know I have some work to do before I even get to that point. Which is my final segue, which I've tried 3 times, my final segue into the books. There's a few books it's a smattering of books. And again, don't worry about it, I'm down. I'll make a bibliography and I'll include them for next week. But I want to give the oral orientation of them now. The first book is Desmond Tutu's No Future Without Forgiveness. And if, as I was reading her story, she had 2 chapters now on the oral history project, and I'll see if I can't find some resources related to the oral history project that she was a part of and anxious to talk about it. But one of the things that if I could, I'd make this the 67th book of the canon of the Bible. I feel like the theology, the lessons, it is absolutely one of my favorite books of all time. But he is writing about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission post-apartheid in South Africa, and part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is truth telling, is telling stories. It is the Afrikaners, the white Afrikaners, who have been in this position of power. In order for there to be healing within that nation, there is the truth telling and the nation listening to the effects of apartheid and the violence that has been inflicted upon the Black South Africans. And it is a hard read as far as for emotionally. And yet, because of the storytelling, and yet it's again beginning to open that door a little bit for us to be woefully sad for the stories that are being shared, and incredibly grateful for their courage in sharing them, building that gratitude muscle. Does that make sense? And then I've got several piles here. First, with regard to African-American history, for the most part, within the United States, gold standard would be The New Jim Crow by Melissa Alexander. And I would certainly encourage and promote that one. That has been a bestseller for 6 years, 7 years, something like that. Fearless Dialogues. This is in line again with what we're talking about tonight. This is by Gregory Ellison. Again, I'm going to write these down. And this is again that process of how do we have not fearless as in like brave and, you know, parachuting or jumping out of an airplane like some people, looking at you, John. But how do we have less fear in these dialogues? And he gets a little bit more into the praxis of the dialogue sessions and listening and engaging others. I'm gonna get to that one in a minute. The Color of Compromise by Tisby, another good source. This is the one that this is good. I recommend that one. This is one called Be the Bridge by Latasha Morrison that if we were, Emily and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, like what might be a next thing? If we were to do a book study, this would probably be the one that I would have us do a book study on. Or if we were to have another racism class, I would probably center it around this one. It's a step up from what we're currently doing as far as for engagement, content, and the like, and confronting racism. And I don't know exactly what would be the best format, if it's a book study, if it's another Sunday morning session like this, but this is the one that my heart wanted to lead off with, but we have to have some work to get to this, which is not quite The New Jim Crow, which is, I think, maybe a little bit more beyond Be the Bridge. But this would be the next one that I would have us do. So if out of all of these, No Future Without Forgiveness and Be the Bridge are the two that I'd probably have you on your Oprah list for 2022.
Natalie,
as well as, of course, I'm not Oprah.
Natalie is 2 of the 3 elders on Christian Ed. I think we just heard somebody volunteer to teach the next class.
I think so.
Next
Yeah, I'm
round.
always,
I agree with you. I picked up on that too, John.
I'm always agreeable to do it. This is the one y'all have heard me tell a few times, Robert E. Lee and me. John gave me this book, and it's gripping, and it's another way of what, again, I think is a demonstration of a white person doing the heavy lifting of some soul searching and some asking questions, researching history, and being putting himself in a position to understand how his family of origin and the culture in which he raised shaped, and I think you would argue maybe even distorted his view of the world, to blind him from being able to see the realities of racism, both historically and presently. And so
I did, Josh, for that one, I've thought a lot about that book the last couple of weeks in the context of this class. That one, I think, comes at, if you read that book, you'll come away with a very good understanding of how racism and more than that, but pro-whiteness is institutionalized in the country, and it's through the lens of how it was done at in the military, but at West Point. And you think of, well, duty, honor, country, all that kind of stuff, but I mean, it's unambiguous there, and it's a little bit different take. It's not coming from a take of how minorities were suppressed as much as minorities actions were taken to correct some of the wrongs that have been done over a period of time. This book shows how white supremacists and those that would want to keep segments of the country pro-white elevated their game in response to the removal of some of the Jim Crow laws and trying to elevate minorities.
Yeah.
A very, very interesting take.
Good. Thank you, sir. Okay. Hispanic Americans. Did you hand me this one last week, Emily?
No.
Who handed me this one last week? I don't know.
Henrietta Lacks.
It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
It was Sally who gave it to you. Sally.
Sally Cripe. Sally
Mhm.
offered this one. I have not read it. She just gave it to me last week. And I would say she really appreciated the way in which this told her story. And I'm looking forward to reading that. The Injustice Never Leaves You, the anti-Mexican violence in Texas. I've made it halfway through this, and this is some truth telling along with Forget the Alamo. This is some truth telling about Texas history grounded in facts and not whitewashing. We have new neighbors that moved in next door, an Indian family. The husband and wife were born in India, went to college in India, got their first jobs in India, moved to Toronto, then moved to Chicago, had a child. The child's 11 years old. They now just moved here to Austin. They invited us over to Bali 2 weeks ago, which was really fun because I've never had that before. And they had us over Friday night for board games, which was a lot of fun. And I was talking to the 11-year-old who's in 7th grade, 12-year-old, excuse me, who's in 7th grade, and she's in Texas State history. And that week she had just learned about the Alamo. And I said, oh, why don't you tell me what you learned about the Alamo? And it was what I learned about the Alamo in 7th grade.
Wow. I'm sure it's the same.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not a story that's firmly rooted in historical facts. And I think it was The Injustice Never Leaves You was the first time that I truly, well, it's the first time ever I had heard about just the heinous, dastardly violence of Mexican Americans and Mexicans and Hispanics in South Texas. And that one has been a hard read because it is just, in reading it about the violence of the 19th century into the 20th century and seeing its effects still to the present day based on something, in that culture, in that South Texas era, has been very difficult. It's very hard to see that is still as much of an open wound as ever, and given nowhere near as much time and attention as Civil War and slavery. And then finally, this one is called But I Don't See You as Asian, by Bruce Reyes Chow. He was the moderator of the Presbyterian Church a decade or so ago, and he's a AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander, and he is writing about microaggressions. These are the things of like folks approaching him and saying, "Oh, you got a good recipe for Kung Pao chicken?" And he's like, "I don't like Kung Pao." He didn't say this. I'm making this up. That's a microaggression. Oh yeah, well, let's not have Bruce drive. These sort of passive things where we're pulling from the potpourri grab bag of racism and casting it upon someone else in such little minor ways. Nothing overt, but just little bit of microaggressions. And he also is engaging in this conversation, writing about how do we engage in this practice of conversation. Does that make sense? So I think y'all might have heard from me a while back say that there is, partnering up with Mount Zion Baptist Church in East Austin, where my good buddy had come to preach. He is now the senior pastor there. It would be great to partner up in conversation with them and to relationship with them, and strongly African-American church. And yet we have work to do before we go there. Does that make sense? And this is what I've been doing to try to get myself moved on that progressive line that I was talking about, where polarized, defensive, minimalized, acceptance, adaptive. This is the work that I've had to do. And then I'm a little bit more disciplined as I'm engaging in those conversations. And you're seeing that with her and her book as well, and the Anxious to Talk About It book. Okay. I've got to end. It's so good to see you. Who would be so willing to close us in prayer, using the prayer that's on the handout or one that you would like to make on your own? Thank you, Diane.
Gracious God, our sins are too heavy to carry, too real to hide, and too deep to undo. Forgive what our lips tremble to name, what our hearts can no longer bear, and what has become for us a consuming fire of judgment. Set us free from a past we cannot change. Open us to a future in which we can be changed. And grant us grace to know more and more in your light, to grow more and more in your likeness and image. Through Jesus Christ, the light of the world. Amen.
Amen. All right, Zoomlandia, good to see you. God's peace be with you. Be safe, be healthy. See y'all next week. Last class next week.